So today we are going to look at the Laravel file structure, and we are going to look at how best you can organize your file structure, how best you can organize your Laravel project. So yeah, I'm going to go in deep dive of explaining what these files are for, why they are there in Laravel, and what they actually do. So the very first file that you find in your Laravel project is the app file or the app folder. So this application folder contains other folders like HTTP, modules, providers, exceptions, and console. This is like the core of your application. Think of it like the brain, and this is where most of our functionality lives, or most of our logic stays. So first of all, I'm going to skip this folder called the console folder, and then I'm going to head over to the HTTP folder. So in this HTTP folder, this is where we're going to be able to handle the requests and responses that are made by our application. And down, we're going to find out that it contains different folders. Now, like it contains the controllers folder, and in this controllers folder, this is where we are going to find we're going to decide how we interact with the application. And then we are going to also find the middleware folder. This is where we are able to check or filter the requests that are made by the controllers, or this is how we are able to customize the data and the logic that is inside our controllers. Then when I go to my modules folder, this is where we are going to find the database representation of our data in our application. This is where we're going to do functionalities like creating, being able to customize which data that we would want to see from the database inside our application. So yeah, then I have a providers folder. This is where we're going to configure and load features such as, let me say I want to connect to the database and so many others. So yeah, then when I go to the next folder, so I'm going to close the application folder, the app folder, and then I explain what the bootstrap folder does. So this folder basically it's where Laravel starts its functionality. So whenever you start up a Laravel project, it is going to start all its running functionalities from the bootstrap folder. So it is where Laravel loads from, like at the very start of the application. And most of the times when you're dealing with your project, you're not going to touch the bootstrap folder. Then the other file or the other folder that we're going to go to is the config folder, and this is where all our settings are going to live. The settings for the database, the settings for the mails, in case you're going to implement functionalities like caching, and then in case you'd want to implement other functionalities like logging, and maybe even customizing how the authentication is going to work, even the sessions, how you'd want them to work in your whole application. This is where we're going to find all the settings for a Laravel system or the Laravel project that you have. Then when we look at the database folder, this is where you manage your application's data, like the migration. So under the database folder, I'm having a folder called factories. Now in Laravel, factories are used for creating fake data that I can use for testing my application. Let me say I'm creating an e-commerce store, and as I'm developing my product, I would want to work with data like product images, product descriptions, and product names. So under my factories folder, that's where I can be able to customize or create this fake data. Then under my database folder, I'm having another folder called migrations. Migrations are the blueprints for creating database tables in a Laravel project. So we're going to go deep down into migrations later on in the series, but as per now, just know that the migrations folder contains the blueprints that help you in creating and customizing Laravel databases, database tables, and even creating CRUD operations. Let me say you want to create a table, you want to delete a table, you want to add a column. All those different operations, they are done under the migrations folder. Then I have a seeders folder, and in this folder, this is where we are able to fill those tables with the initial data that was created using the factories. So in the seeders section, we are going to find out that we are able to customize how we would want this data that was created, and we are able to now place it into the database successfully. So besides the database folder, I have a lang folder. So inside this lang folder, this is where you customize the multi-language features of your application. Let me say your application would want to use very many different languages like English, Spanish, French, many others. This is where you go and you customize all those settings for your application. Then I have the public folder. So inside this public folder, it is like the front door of my application. This is where the very first file that is run by the web server is the index.php file. And then this is where in the index.php file, this is where every request is handled. Like when someone goes to like www.example.com, this is the first file that is picked by the server and it is given to the user. So most of the times, this is where you're going to create your assets. This is where your assets are going to be for your images, your CSS, JavaScript, and so many others. Then I have the resources folder. So the resources folder, you can call it the front end of my whole application. This is where the front end is. And then in the application folder, in the app folder, that's where like the back end is. So yeah. In the resources folder, I'm going to find very many folders. Now I have the CSS, the JavaScript, and then the views folder. So in the CSS folder, this is where we find the compiled CSS files of my Laravel project. Then inside the JavaScript, the JS folder, that's where I'm going to find the compiled JavaScript files. After having compiled them, most of the time these compiled JavaScript files enable us to be able to reduce on the file size of our JavaScript file and the application in general. Then I also have a views folder. Now this is where we are going to create our templates, our front-end templates that are going to have the dynamic PHP content. So basically this is where you're able to create those front-end files or the HTML files basically. Then going back to the root, I have the routes folder. So now inside this routes folder, this is how we define how we respond to the responses that are made to our application. So this routes file contains there are four files: the API file, channels file, console file, and the web.php file. So most of the times when you're dealing with a basic application, the web.php folder is where you're going to spend most of your time, because this is where you're going to start customizing the routes of your whole application. Or even let me say someone wants to go to like the stores. Let me say I have an e-commerce application and you want to go to a section called baby clothes. So this is where you can go and actually customize how you want that route to look like. So basically this is where you're going to spend most of your time, because you're working with different routes of your whole application. Then the other thing is I have this API folder, an API file. So this PHP file is where it's the one that mostly handles the API calls that are made to the application. Let me say you're working on a project and you would want to create, let me say, a REST API or any other type of API. So this is basically where you're going to customize everything from concerning the API routes. Then on going back, I have a storage folder. This storage folder is where I'm going to store all the files and the logs of my whole application. Let me say I upload a folder, or let me say in my application I'm having a functionality whereby in the admin dashboard, I would want to upload images, I would want to upload PDF files, and so many other different types of files. So basically, this is where I'm going to be able to store all those files in my whole application, and even the cache of my application. This is where it's going to be. I'm going to go deep down in explaining the storage folder in later on in the series as we continue learning about Laravel and how it works. Then next on, I have the tests folder. So this is where I'm able to automate the tests of my whole application, ensuring that it works as expected. So basically, most of the times as you're developing your application, you'd want to make sure that everything is right and everything is actually working the way it is. So that is why most of the times we do what we call testing of an application. So basically, this is where we're going to do the tests of a Laravel application. This is where you customize every single thing and make sure that everything is functional. Then lastly, I have a folder called vendor. So this vendor file contains all the third-party code that is installed via Composer and Laravel itself. So most of the times as you're working on your project, let me say you're installing a third-party tool like Breeze for the admin dashboard. This is where all of those files are put in place, or where they are kept. So in an application, on your day-to-day work with Laravel, you're going to not actually even touch that folder. So yeah, now in the root folder for a Laravel project, I have other files. So right about now, I have this editor config file. So this file, as per now, since I'm using VS Code, so this is a file that helps me customize how my editor is going to read this Laravel application. So most of the times I may not be able to touch it, sometimes in case I want to customize it or not. Then I have the .m file. So this is like your application's secret keeper. It stores all our sensitive details concerning the database credentials of our application, the API keys. This is where you're going to place let me say like the passwords to your Redis connections, to your mail server, and all those different stuff, your session keys, every single thing. So this is one of the most important files in your Laravel application that you're actually supposed to keep secret and not share the details to any other person. Then I have the f.example file. This is like a copy of the actual m file, because instead of uploading your m file, let me say, to like your repository online and stuff as you're sharing your project, you wouldn't want to expose your secrets to the other people. So that's why they give you an example file, so that when you're sharing your project, you actually don't share the m file. Then I have a git.attributes file, a git.ignore file. So when you're working with a Laravel project, we use something called a source controller or a source code controller, and Git is one of those examples whereby we are able to manage our source code using Git. So this git ignore and git.attributes file enable us to customize how we would want Git to be able to work with our whole project and the whole application at large. Then I have the artisan file. Most of the times when you're running a Laravel project, the artisan file is where, it is like a tool that is used to run features in your Laravel project. Let me say you want to create a model, you want to create a controller, or you want to create a new route or some other thing. So this is the file that is run by Laravel to actually enable you to create all those different features in your application. Then I have the composer.json file that contains the descriptions, or like some of the packages that are installed by Laravel, or even Node.js or npm, and their versions. Then I have a readme file. This is a file that contains, let me say, you can use it as your documentation for your whole application project, and actually you can talk about how the whole application works in Laravel. So guys, For these other files, I'll be explaining them along the way, but you have to know that as per now and as we go on in the series, I'll be explaining more and more so that you get a deeper understanding of how this whole Laravel project works. So yeah, thank you guys. Please subscribe to my channel, and because it will help me so much as we go on in this journey, as we learn Laravel together. So yeah, see you in the next tutorial, because we are going to learn and have a deep dive on creating our very first application in Laravel and creating routes like home, about us, and so many others. So stay tuned and please subscribe to my channel. It helps me so much because it helps me in making these tutorials far better, and even so that it helps us on our journey together. So yeah, thank you guys. See you in the next session. Have a good day.